Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for a very special Facebook Live with our own Virginia Stanley as she interviews best-selling author Laura Lippman. Feel free to type in questions in the comments, and we'll get ready to go. Over to you guys.
Okay. Well, thank you all for tuning in for this really exciting special episode of Library Love Fest. Laura, thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thrilled to be here.
Taking
Thank
the
you
time.
for the wine.
You're very welcome. We'll be drinking much of it, I hope.
Oh, whoa, okay.
Okay.
That'll get interesting.
So, we're so excited that you're here. This is the Library Love Fest Tiki Hut, and a lot of good things happen here. I noticed recently in a tweet that you had said that you like to think that you put the double L's in Library Love Fest.
I think that's probably true, right?
I think it's very true. Okay, so a little bit of background on Laura Lippman. So you have your award-winning Tess Monahan series, which is amazing. It's won virtually every award, every mystery award, the Edgar, the Anthony, the Seamus. You can go on and on and on. You've written your first 7 books you wrote while you were working at the Sun.
The Baltimore Sun,
The
right?
Baltimore Sun. You've written an anthology of award-winning short stories, and you have written a collection of critically acclaimed standalone novels. They are all my favorites, but we are here to talk to you. 2 of those books made the Library Reads list, which is really wonderful. The Library Reads list was started in 2013, so not a bad record. It's not
That's
that
right.
long.
There's only so many. I've only had like 4 books since then.
I
So
know.
how many could I get on there?
I don't know. Well, 2 is pretty good.
2 is pretty good.
Not
yeah.
bad, not bad. So that was After I'm Gone and Wild Lake, which Stephen King was like, hey, get on that. It's fantastic, and it is. So, but we're here today to talk about Sunburn. Laura Lippman, this is so amazing. Look how I've dog-eared this book. I'm ashamed of myself, but it's fantastic. Okay, it's a psychological thriller. First, we have to have a toast because red wine appears very much in this book.
Yes.
And here's to you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. Okay, I don't want to give away too much of this book, so I would like you to give a little description, enough to wet the whistle.
This book sort of has 2 unusual literary inspirations that sound very different at first. On the one hand, it's clearly James Cain, and it's all of James Cain because I'm a huge James Cain fan. You'll find Mildred Pearson here and Double Indemnity, Love's Lovely Counterfeit, but primarily it's sort of that idea of what if in The Postman Always Rings Twice the drifter is female and the more rooted to the place person is a man? How does that change the story? And in 1995 there's a beautiful book called Ladder of Years by the greatest writer living in Baltimore, Ann Tyler, about a woman who on a family vacation in Delaware stands up and walks away from her family. That's an Ann Tyler novel. It's funny, it's brilliant, it's compassionate, it's filled with so much wisdom about human nature. But that is, in another rendition, a really noir idea. That is a dark, or it can be a dark idea. She played it very differently. And I thought about just taking those 2 things together. A woman has walked away from her family. She has stopped in the small inland Delaware town, too far inland to be a beach town, but not far enough to be close to anything. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere in Delaware. She stops. She seems to be intent on moving on, but for some reason she stays. And part of the reason she stays is because of a man she meets in a bar. And part of the reason he stays is because he's met her. And they both have secrets. And as they get to know each other better, as they might even be falling in love with each other, it becomes increasingly impossible for them to tell each other their secrets. And that's Sunburn.
That's Sunburn. Yeah. Boy, it's hard to talk about this book without giving anything away. And the last thing you want anybody to do is give anything away. But all I want to do is talk to you about this book because it's so good. And these characters are so, they're so well developed. And the female character, Polly, can I say her name? Of course.
Is it Polly? Is it Pauline? What is her name?
That's true.
Right there. But
That's
we'll call
true.
her Polly
Okay,
for
we'll call her Polly.
purposes of convenience.
All It was hard to like her. She's not a likable. She's not, in my opinion, not a sympathetic creature. But by the end, and again, I'm not going to give much away. I want to know how you are able to make the reader have a change, a real change of heart, a true change of heart when you think you know somebody.
I think the most non-spoilerish answer I can give is that it all hinges on if the reader agrees that Polly's agenda, mission, if you will, is of such gravity that she is entitled to do all the things she does to achieve it. In other words, if you buy in to what Polly is trying to do, you will forgive her anything. And if you say, no, that was not worth it, then you will not. And I'm okay with either outcome. But it's really intentional in this book. And by the way, Polly is most often described by men. You know, there are a lot of different viewpoints in this book.
Yeah.
There are only 2 female viewpoints. No, wait. There are 3 female viewpoints that are not Polly. And 2 of them are very glancing. Like, off. So, you know, there's a woman who has suffered a great tragic loss, and we see life through her eyes. And we see one chapter through the eyes of Polly's former mother-in-law. Other than that, Polly's really the only female voice in the book, and she has an antagonist in Kath, who we get to know a little bit. But mostly Polly is described by men. And one after another, they proclaim her to be unnatural. But what each one means by that is different. And primarily what they mean is that she's really self-contained. She's not needy. She doesn't ask for much. She doesn't expect much. She can take care of herself. And again, that word is used again and again in the book, unnatural. She's unnatural. And I thought that was really key, you know, and I think for a long time in reading the book, readers are going to share that viewpoint of the male characters.
Yeah.
She's provocative, she's enticing, she's interesting, but there's something wrong with her. And it'll be for the reader to decide if they agree with the men.
Right. And I don't think, I actually don't know that other readers would feel the same way I do. Do you know? I think obviously everything is so subjective, but I felt like, geez, I'm not really sure now. You know, I just think it's wonderful. I think it's such a gift that you have, that you can do that, and then you kind of have to leave it up to the reader to decide. Like, you know, you fill in the blanks. The reader, I think, has to fill in the blanks on how,
on a lot of it.
Yeah.
And there's she's not going to be an easy person to forgive if one does choose to forgive her.
Yeah. Right. I also love the way you drew Adam, and I wanted to ask you again. We have to talk in broad strokes, but how is it hard to write from the male point of view? Because a lot of times he's talking about her, and so I thought, well, I don't know what that's like for you to try and get into his head and describe her. Because right in the very beginning, I mean, book opens with him observing her in this bar, and he's sizing her up. I love the opening paragraph of this book, and I just wondered what that's like for you, and how do you do that, and so effectively?
I mean, on principle, as a writer, I don't deny any writer the attempt to write from any point of view. Orwell has a line that I'll mangle, which is, you know, as long as you can do it, you can get. As long as you can get away with it, you can do it. That said, it's tricky for a woman to write as a man. It's tricky for a man to write as a woman. What I will say as a female writer who has written often from the male perspective is that I think the prey knows the predator a little bit better than the predator knows the prey. I think women have spent a lot more time thinking about men, thinking about how men see them, thinking about how they need to finesse and manipulate situations to get what they want. I think they've thought about that a little bit, whereas I think men generally, and now talking about heteronormative, blah, 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 I think men are like pretty girl want.
Yeah, right.
How do I get pretty girl? And to the extent that they need to think about what the pretty girl is thinking, they try to think that way.
Right.
Whereas I think women have to navigate this minefield of male behavior and male desires, and they need to understand it all. Not just that they might want the man and the man might want something for them. They need to understand how the ego works, what's at stake. You know, they just need to know. So I think as a woman, I've spent a lot of time, you know, I worked in these very male-dominated offices where I had to learn to understand whether or not I would be allowed to speak my mind directly. Think about that. Think about that. And I really wonder, for men who are watching this, how often you have asked yourself, could I state my opinion directly without causing harm to my career or upsetting someone? I really wonder how often that idea goes through a man's mind. It was going through my head earlier today. And not even about a man. It was about a friend asked this advice. I need to give her advice. It's not what she's going to want to hear. Do I need to finesse this? Should I even enter into it? I just think women's wheels are turning a lot about sort of the way we move through the world socially and how people receive what we say. It's the best way I can put it.
Yeah, you're making me think, and I thought about bringing this up, and now I would never be able to find it. But there's a part in here where you talk about where one of them would write a book, like maybe I should write a book about how women. Do you remember that part?
Yes. Polly thinks that she wants to write an advice book for men, which basically tells them that everything they want to do is correct. Right? Like, you know, that her advice book to men would affirm every belief they have about the proper way to do something. Whereas advice books for women are generally built on the principle that you're doing everything wrong and you need to do things differently.
Right.
Which is, you know, why women love self-help books, I think, in general. But that men basically want to be told, you're doing everything right, just keep going. They want, you know, you tell them what they want to hear. That's Polly.
I thought that was brilliant. I thought it was for funny. It was because she was being sort of sarcastic, but it was like, she's spot on, you know? Okay, so...
well, we have about 50 people watching now.
Hi,
and,
welcome.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to remind everyone that you can post your comments or questions or love in the comments below the video. We have Lillian Dabney, a librarian from Seattle, who's watching us now, and she says she loves Library Love Fest. So thank you, Lillian, for joining us. And yeah, please continue to post questions and comments.
Okay, great. Yep, keep them. Bring them on. So James Cain, I didn't realize that he was a journalist at the Baltimore Sun.
He was a writer of the Baltimore Sun. He lived in Baltimore part of his life. For people who are paying really close attention, it's not incidental that in the Tess Monahan series she attended Washington College because James Cain's father was president of Washington College. Cain was a huge, I want to say influence, except when I first started writing, I had no noir voice inside of me. And I loved his books. They were incredibly important books to me. But when I started writing crime fiction and I thought I would be James Cain, I wasn't. It just wasn't that. And I think in general, I'm not Cain. But in this moment in time, I really felt like I was channeling Cain.
Yeah.
And it was very important to me to write a lean, mean book. I mean, I sort of laugh at myself because it's still probably 40% longer than The Postman Always Rings Twice. But for me, this is a short book. For me to write a book that's under 80,000 words was like, wow, that's like barely counts as a book. I hope they don't get mad at me. And it's like, I mean, I think literally my contracts stipulate I'm supposed to write books that are 90,000 words long. Not that that's really hard and fast. But I loved what he did. And I love noir. I love it in books. I love it in film. I have my own very special definition of it, which is, to me, noir is very simple. It's about a world in which dreamers become schemers. In other words, we all want certain things. We want money. We want love. Most of us resist crossing a criminal line to get what we want. We accept that boundary, which is, I want these things, but I'm not going to do dastardly deeds to get them. In noir novels, people begin to violate those boundaries, and I think that happens in Sunburn.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it definitely happens in Sunburn. I'm trying adding up all the bodies in my head and the double crosses and triple crosses. But that's all it is. I mean, and I think that's actually why noir works, is because we identify with the impulse even if we don't identify with the action.
Yep, I get that. I completely understand exactly what you're saying. I like the part in the book, one of the many parts of the book that I like, where you actually put James Cain in there when Polly goes to, well, you can say.
Polly, as a young married woman with unusual circumstances that we won't talk about, has to get out of the house and do something with her time on a regular basis. And she stumbles into a James Cain film festival at the Baltimore Museum of Art. She's a high school graduate. She's never heard of James Cain. She doesn't know these movies. It is, again, at this point, I guess it's the 80s.
Yep.
Because the book is set in 1995. And she's astonished by this world. And then she finds out, oh my goodness, they're books and I can read them. And she does fall into the world of James Cain and finds him to be a very helpful mentor in some ways.
Which is all we can say, right?
Yeah, that's all we can say.
That's all we can say. You'll have to read the book.
Great.
Okay, while we're staying on the James Cain bit, I love, can we say dialogue? Can we just say two of the things that you say in
Sure.
Okay, I don't think they give anything away. But I was looking up James Cain, and there's a line from Double Indemnity where he says, I loved her like a rabbit loved a rattlesnake. I love that. And
That's really good.
And so that just kind of like was like, that's what you're doing in this book with these.
Wow.
I think you are. I mean, this copy is amazing. It's, I mean, can we just say that?
Yeah, you can.
I love this. So there's, when I read the book, I felt like there was this very tough guy delivery in my head while I was reading it. And I hope that's what you wanted, because that's what I got. I found the dialogue at times, not ever. I found it kind of wise-assy and snappy and smart and clippy, and I just loved it. It brought me right into it. It brought me right into it from the first paragraph when he's describing her sitting there. I love it. He's talking about her sunburn and the peeling skin. And what kind of a 30-year-old does a...
What kind of redhead makes that mistake
Right.
to get that kind of sunburn when she's well into her 30s?
Right. And so he says to her, they meet at this, right?
They're at a roadside tavern restaurant in Belleville, Delaware, fictional town. A fictional tavern called the Hi-Ho, High-Ho,
Right.
which actually doesn't make any sense.
It's so
People are always like,
anti that.
why is it? Well, that's not how you spell Hi-Ho, but maybe it's a former High's Dairy store. Nobody knows. But
Right.
they're at the Hi-Ho, sitting at the bar. And she's taken a seat, and she's nursing something amber, I believe.
Yes.
And he takes a seat, and he places his order.
Right. And do you want to read it? It's just so damn funny. I love it.
He places an order for red wine, and then he says, sort of to himself, what kind of asshole orders red wine in a tavern in Belleville, Delaware? Polly says, I don't know. What kind of an asshole are you? And she's not even looking at him. And she says, that is influenced by something that kind of happened to me. There's a place in South Baltimore, not even in Baltimore proper. There's a place south of Baltimore called Brooklyn, which is a pretty tough little town. And it had a place for a while, it's gone now, called the Club 4100. It was sort of a shrine to Johnny Unitas. I love this place. And I remember going there one time with my husband. I feel like we had just come from a school event, so I really needed wine badly. And I ordered a glass of red wine, and it was served refrigerator cold. Like straight from the fridge.
Right.
And I was just sort of like, and my husband said, fairly, well, this is what you get for ordering red wine at the Club 4100.
Right.
What do you think? So I think that was very much on my mind. This will sound funny, but the Hi-Ho for me is so much the heart of the book. This tavern where there's this kind of quirky, eccentric owner known as Mr. C,
Right.
who is so pale that the C stands for Casper, but no one tells him that to his face. And it does not much business, but does just enough to survive. And there are these two old barflies who come in every day and have the same, Max and Ernest, they have the same conversation every day. They don't tip. It's a place that nobody really ever stops. Although that changes when the character known as Adam ends up getting a job there and starts cooking. And what no one knows about Adam is that he's actually a classically trained chef. Who is, and I'm very good friends with a novelist, writer, essayist, Ann Hood. And this past spring, I had the great honor of performing the wedding ceremony between Ann Hood and her husband, Michael Rollman, who is a writer who is also a trained chef who went to the Culinary Institute of Arts up in Hyde Park. Michael went over all the cooking details in this book for me. And the book is dedicated to them. I mean, it is dedicated to them, although it says, because in real life I like happy endings as opposed to in my books. And Michael and I had enormous fun talking about what we call the grilled cheese of seduction. Because when Adam finally begins making progress with Polly. When Adam finally begins making progress with Polly, it's because he makes her the world's greatest grilled cheese sandwich. But it has to be a 1995 tavern grilled cheese sandwich. So there's no artisanal bread, and there's only very ordinary cheddar in the fridge. And so I had this belief that I had never seen, and I have eaten many a grilled cheese sandwich with bacon, that the problem with most grilled cheese sandwiches with bacon is that they put this whole piece of bacon on the sandwich, and you bite into it, and it all comes out. Someone on Twitter named this for me, called the dreaded bacon slide. The dreaded, and so what if you cooked the bacon and chopped it very fine and sprinkled it? And so we took it up a notch. We just made this sandwich at the Baltimore Book Festival over the weekend, and we used a trick that's been endorsed by both Gabrielle Hamilton, Ruth Reichel, Julia Moskin, where you put butter on the inside of the sandwich, mayonnaise on the outside.
Oh my God.
Mayonnaise cooks better. And then Michael taught me how to cook bacon in water. So all this
really?
idea,
You need a cookbook.
I know. Well, Michael has done many cookbooks, but but this idea that was so interesting to me of how do you make the greatest grilled cheese sandwich in 1995? When it's not foodie times and you're in Delaware and you've got what you've got, like you chop the bacon very fine. And that was absolutely influenced by Mildred Pierce, the book, in which Mildred has to make her ex-husband a pie. And it's like the greatest pie that ever was. And Kane describes that pie as being about as commercial as a hand-whittled clothespin.
Oh my God.
And I love that phrase, and I use it all the time. And so that was the same moment where Adam makes her this grilled cheese that it's not for the restaurant. It takes too much time, but he is trying to get her attention.
It's great. The descriptions of the grilled cheese, like I'm gonna need a defibrillator because I'm like I have a heart attack reading this book.
It's a good sandwich.
I've
been cooking grilled cheese for 2 weeks now, constantly.
You know, I thought about bringing in the George Foreman grill and made some sandwiches here. It would have been fun. But so speaking of the 1995, so you make references to things of that time, like O.J. Simpson. There's and also Susan Smith. I thought the woman who
not by name though. I think
no,
right?
you didn't put her name
just
in.
that woman down in South Carolina
who put her kids in the car. It was horrible. But I immediately knew who she was. I knew the name. It's so funny. I thought her name was in the book. Isn't that weird? Because I knew who it was. And I lived through those events, and so I thought that was really effective because it just put me more into that time. I just felt like I don't know. I just felt like I was really there, and I don't know why that made a difference, but for some reason it did, and I'm wondering why you said it in 95.
I started the book early in 2016, and I set the book in 1995 because there is a major story point that involves what was then, I'm trying to be so careful to avoid a spoiler.
Yeah, I know.
There was a certain kind of crime that in 1995 was only beginning to be really understood. Nowadays, I'll go ahead and give this much of a spoiler. Our understanding of domestic violence in 1995 is very different from where it is in 2017. Praise the Lord. And in the early 90s was when we first began to talk about battered women syndrome. And it was the first recognition that some women who had been convicted of felonies involving their domestic partners could actually be seen as innocent because they were locked in this psychological syndrome that convinced them that they were trapped and that their only way out was through an act of violence. See, the book has to be set in the early 90s because of that. In 2017, or a little bit later, a person who had done some of the things that one of the characters in this book has done, it would have been more readily understood. So that was really important, but it goes beyond that, because a lot of times when I talk about this book and I talk about 1995, I like to call 1995 the last good year to disappear. We're just beginning to creep onto email. That's when I think I got email in 1995, and I'm on CompuServe, and I have an external modem, and it takes really literally about 15 minutes to connect to this thing called the internet. And then when I get there, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
There's somebody in a pub in Ireland hi, what are we doing? What's going on? There's no Google. There are mobile phones, but very few people have them, and they're very expensive. And there's not this expectation of people being where being of instant communication, of people being answerable to you all the time. And that was all very important to the story too. But that was secondary to the idea of 10 years later, even 5 years later, our society had progressed to a point where there was greater understanding of the circumstances that are involved in domestic violence. So I really needed 1995. The other thing you've picked up on almost everything in this book. I don't know if you've noticed that every single man in this book really hates the song Don't Go Chasing Waterfalls. And they never call it by names, but they're always like, that stupid song
You
about
can't
the
chase a
waterfalls
waterfall.
is like, what are you talking about? Adam hates it, Greg hates it. It's like every man who hears that on the radio is like, I hate that song.
Yeah.
But that was one of the biggest songs of the summer of 1995.
Right.
And there's some other stuff in there, I'm sure people are just dying to know about the fact that Delaware tried to change its primary in 1995.
Yeah, that was very interesting.
Was really riveting stuff there, right?
I mean, it was interesting. It's packed with everything. I mean, there's stuff to learn. I've learned things from this fabulous novel. I really loved it. I loved the setting. I loved the imagery, like the cornfields and the flatlands and the chicken farms and just the sense of place was so beautiful. And I think you kind of answered it, but I was going to ask you, with the hi-ho, was it based on a place? But I guess where you and your husband had the cold the cold chill.
Well, the hi-ho is based on a lot of places, and I actually had one of those eerie moments that writers sometimes have. So my mother lives on the Delaware Shore. My parents retired there years ago, and I have driven between Baltimore and the Delaware Shore many, many times. I wrote one previous short story about Belleville, which is set in the present day, called Five Fires. I think it's out there digitally somewhere. And so I've driven around these small Delaware towns a lot. But it was just this past summer where I was visiting my mom with my kid, and we went to this really old-fashioned water park in Berlin, Maryland, and then had to head home to my mom's place in Delaware. And I drove past. It's not called the Hi-Ho, but it was like, oh my God, I thought I made you up, and there you are.
Oh, wow.
And I'm driving past, you see these roadside taverns.
Yeah.
And they're flat up against the road, and, they serve a little bit, they serve a cheeseburger and a fish sandwich and cheap beer. But the Delaware, this is interesting. I don't think I've talked about this or really thought about this much. I don't consider myself to be someone who writes a lot about nature or landscape. I've always been such an urban writer. But the Delaware, those that part of Delaware, there are only 3 counties in Delaware. That's how tiny it is. And so you're in Sussex County, and there are these places with cornfields and chicken farms and where you see the most amazing sunsets. I was really wanted to try to evoke that landscape, and sort of, because I have been through it so many times, and I'm almost always passing through. And I sort of have that curiosity. There's a town that I passed through, like, you know, if you lived here, you'd be home by now. And like, what would this be like for this to be home? What is it like to live here? And I think that was a big part of the book is, you know, I've written so many books set in Baltimore. I've written so much about Baltimore. I've written about the suburbs of Baltimore. I loved place as a reader and a writer.
Yeah.
But it was so much fun to write about a place I hadn't really written about before, and to create a fictional place, and to be able to control it. You know, you sort of feel like a god. Like, this is my town. I have made it.
Right.
It will do whatever I tell it to do. I've named all the streets. It's in my head, and nobody can tell me I'm wrong. I like that part.
So cool. It's it came across to me. I mean, if that's what you wanted to do, you achieved it. I mean, I think this is just such a tight story, with wonderful, wonderful characters, and I just think that you swim along, and you're kind of on a journey with you to see what happens to them and how you feel about them, but this setting was just so, the arching blue sky. I mean, it's beautiful.
We talked about the arching blue skies right before we sat down to go live, and you know, that is definitely a reference to a book that's so dear to me, which is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. And I've always felt that A Tree Grows in Brooklyn doesn't really get its due. That if Franny Nolan were Frankie Nolan, it would be more readily accepted and admired as a great classic of American literature. And instead, it gets a little bit ghettoized as a girl's book, as a kid's book. I think it's one of the greatest coming-of-age novels written in the 20th century. And there's this brilliant section. It's brilliant if you're a writer, it's brilliant if you're not a writer, where she's 13 years old, her father's a drunk, her mother is miserable, and she has been making straight A's by writing these beautiful essays about arching blue skies and murmuring hemlocks. And then her father dies of his alcoholism, and she starts writing true stories, and the teacher calls her in and says, these are ugly, these are sordid, and tells her that she should write about beauty, and quotes Keats. And she tries, and she realizes that if you're a poor, hungry kid writing stories about a millionaires who's dining on profiterole and Charlotte Russe for dinner, you're still writing that you're hungry. You're just writing it in a very roundabout way. And she takes all these beautiful essays about arching blue skies and the murmuring hemlocks, and she burns them, saying to herself, I am burning ugliness, I am burning lies. And that's like a great lesson for a writer, not to make your work roundabout wish fulfillment. And I learned that when I was so young, which is, you know, don't write novels about people who are impossibly beautiful and impossibly rich, who have every attribute that you wish for yourself. You know, try to be true, try to be authentic. And I liked being able to sort of do that little callback to Betty Smith in this book.
Well done, you.
So we've got a lot of love coming in from the audience.
Hi, audience.
Leanne Smith-Ratno says, hi, Laura. Sorbo loves you.
Hi, Leanne.
Phyllis says, Laura's stories are so good. Love her characters. And we also have someone just a few minutes ago, Jean Fluger says, I have done that drive several times, so cannot wait to read Laura's descriptions.
Yes.
Nice.
So you've got a lot of fans out here. We also have another question from the audience who's asking, possible to talk about the title and its implications throughout the novel. Red hot title for a dark noir story.
Yeah, I think it's possible to talk about it. I'm going to tell a story about titles, if that's okay.
I was going to ask you about titles now.
So titles are hard, and I'm not particularly good at them. And the original title of this novel was Adam and Eve Whiskey Down. Adam and Eve Whiskey Down is diner slang for rye toast with a poached egg. It is integral to the book, as you know, having read it.
Yep.
And I got so whacked out about this that I even designed my own cover where I took a green restaurant receipt and scrawled Adam and Eve, Whiskey Down.
Really?
And by the way, in my most self-aggrandizing, snobby heart of hearts, I was like, you could even say it's an allusion to Finnegan's Wake. Da, da, da. Yeah,
Wow.
I was on. So titles and covers, I believe that what's inside the book belongs to me. Like, I really have to own that. But the title and the cover are a little bit different. And while obviously I should have an opinion and I should have one of the biggest voting blocks, that's also a lot about finding your audience and getting people to read the book. There's a certain marketing vibe to that, which may sound very, it might sound sacrilegious to some people who are like, what about art? What about pure art? And I could sense that people at the publishing house, here at our publishing house, were like, they did not think it was the best title. And I started thinking about that. I was like, there is something to be said on their side, which is when you have a title that isn't clear until the book has been read,
yes,
that is asking a lot of the people you want to pick up the book.
Right.
It's sort of like you're giving somebody the punchline of a joke. Like the title of the book was To Get to the Other Side. And they have to read the whole book to find out that the question is, why did the chicken cross the road? And while that might seem very satisfying to the writer as an intellectual pursuit, you're really losing sight of the fact that your book is, I think of books as being very collaborative between writer and reader. I want people to read my book. Sue me. I just don't feel that the book really matters until someone picks it up and reads it. And I began to see how that title, Adam and Eve, Whiskey Down, it didn't really convey anything. And so I had learned about this psychological concept of when you've been doing something one way and it's not working for you, go opposite. So what would be opposite of Adam and Eve, Whiskey Down? Well, it would be shorter.
Right.
It would be 1 or 2 words. And it would be a word that is general enough that people could project onto it what they meant. And I opened my own book and I looked at my own book, and there on page 1, Adam is looking at Polly's sunburn. And I don't think it's a spoiler to tell you there are quite a few fires in this book. It's set in the summertime. It's set in a hot, steamy summer. And there are some big fires in this book. And I was like, sunburn. That's opposite. I'm going to go from the wordy title that's so very specific that you have to read the book to understand, to the one-word title that means something to everybody. And I was really happy with it. And so that's where sunburn came from, is I really, it's funny to think about the fact that this book is going to come out in the dead of winter.
Right. Oh,
I hope it'll
heat
heat things up.
That's funny.
I think people, because in some ways it's such a beach book, because it is about heat and summer.
Yeah.
But it's also it has that moment where the summer ends and the cold weather comes in and things begin to die. That was fun writing that part too, and Polly's expectations about Halloween and what it might be like in her new town. But
yes.
yeah. So I was, and it was really interesting because I feel like as soon as we had that title Sunburn, then we got this I think the cover is gorgeous.
I love it.
I'm crazy about it. And it was sort of like everything worked. So no regrets. I'll tell the story honestly that I had a different title for it, just so people know that writers often don't know what the right title is for their own. This writer I often don't know the right title for my books.
Interesting.
I would say that 22, 23 books in, I'd say 20 of them have started off with the wrong title.
Is that right? Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's 22 books is amazing. Yeah, I think the jacket, the cover, the jacket art is, I think it just evokes the feel of the book, and I love the title. So, and I agree with you, having read it. It's like, oh yeah, well that would have, now that the other title makes sense having read it, but if I'm
having read it, but that makes no sense.
No.
It's like, we talked about this word that's repeated in the book, which is lanyap, the little something, and yeah, that's great, but it's kind of counterproductive to ask people to
Yeah.
read 275 pages to find out why they really like that title.
Right.
And I think instead most people would have been like, I don't want to read a biblical allegory about grilled cheese sandwiches. I don't know what's going on. What
Right.
the heck is this?
Right. I'm glad that you like the jacket. I'm and I love that title. I think it's great. So we've got two wonderful starred reviews from Library Journal and from Kirkus, and Kirkus says this is a plotty, page-turning pleasure, and Library Journal calls this a tasty feast of a novel. They must have been talking about the grilled cheese. Only kidding. Modern noir at its best. It doesn't get better than that. It will delight old movie lovers, satisfy suspense readers, and reward Lippman's legions of fans. Legions. You have legions. And
Rise and do my bidding.
Listen, I can attest to that because, Laura, you have been a huge supporter of libraries. You and I have known each other a long time.
Yes.
And you have, your support has never been lost on anybody in this business. In publishing, in libraries, time and time again, you've gotten on a boat, you've gotten on a train, you've gotten on a plane, you will go. If you can do it, you will go. And you've spoken at national conferences, and you and your husband, David Simon, spoke together at the Public Library Association's President's Program at ALA when we were in New Orleans. That was
true.
2011.
2011. It's actually very rare for David and me to appear in public. We're going to do it next year in Seattle. We agreed to do it in a big speaker series I have there, and I think he might appear with me for one of the New York events for this book. But for the most part, we've always tried to keep things separate.
Yep.
He has a very big career. I have my career. And, we've always worried that when we sit down, people want to talk about our domestic life, which we prefer to keep private. And which, frankly, is not that interesting. I mean, I think the interior of anybody's household is the same. Did you do the laundry? No, I thought you were going to do the laundry. The dishwasher is dirty. Could you start it? Is the soccer uniform clean? I don't, that stuff is kind of the same from household to household. And I don't know what people think about writer couples. I can't even remember what I used to think about them. There's less talk about writing and art and creation than most people probably hope and think. I will say that when your spouse is someone who's in a creative field, what's great is they kind of get what you're doing. Yeah. In the very general sense, and in, even sometimes in the very specific sense. I don't know. Okay, so my reading comprehension sometimes is not what it should be, and I took an assignment to write a short story, and I wrote the short story, and then I have an assistant, and she was going over the short story. She said, it's pretty good. Do you remember that the original email says it needs to take place in a bookstore? I'm like, oh, God, no. So I redid the story, and I had to have a scene in a bookstore. And then we went back and we looked at the email again. It was like, no, not any bookstore. It has to take place in a specific bookstore.
Oh, no.
So I solved it again. I'm nothing. And what's fun is at the end of the day, I can tell that story to my husband in 3 minutes, and he gets it. He totally understands the chagrin of not being able to read your own email, and also the pleasure of solving the problem. And so he gets that, and so that is nice. But in general, we did that. The reason we were there in 2011 was because A, it was you, B, it was libraries, and C, it was New Orleans. And libraries in New Orleans, that's pretty much the Venn diagram of, I'll pretty much do anything for that. New Orleans is really precious to us. It became our part-time home for 5 years, and we still spend a lot of time there, and we love it very much. But, libraries, my mom, children's librarian, still volunteers at the small town library, Bethany, just north of where she lives. She used to volunteer at that library in Delaware. Carla Hayden, who's now our Librarian of Congress, was incredibly supportive of all Baltimore writers, but particularly loved mysteries. I wrote Carla into one of my books. I can't imagine myself without libraries. Yeah. They're just, there's so much of, and it's not even just books always. I was telling someone, Like, how did I become such a huge Stephen Sondheim fan? Because I was that weird little geek who at 11 was going through the record collection at my library branch. I was like, I'm going to listen to this thing called Follies. You know, like 11 years old, going home with a copy of Follies, and you know, I'm going to listen to Pacific Overtures. You know, libraries made me. I in that short story I was working on, I realized that in a very subtextual, deep way, it's inspired by Judy's Journey, a Lois Linsky children's book. You know, and I don't even know anyone reads Lois Linsky anymore, but this stuff is, it's like cellular for me.
Yeah.
It's the building blocks that I'm made of, are the books that I read in my library, sort of between the ages of, I'd say, like between 9 and 18. And I think the one thing that when I teach writing, the thing that you can't change and you can't undo is, what do people read during those sponge years? Because those are the books that are going to make you a writer. You can read well and smart and intellectually as your entire life, but what did you just take in like it was nutrition? I come back to those books again and again.
The sponge years. One of my last questions to you is, did you have a favorite childhood book? And I guess
I have so many. If I have to pick one, I think The Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Bosley Frankweiler is one of the most perfect books ever written.
Oh my God, I can't believe you just said that.
It's perfect.
We've never had this conversation.
No, we haven't, but it's a perfect book. And the Betsy Tacy series, I'll tell a funny story about myself. I love the Betsy Tacy series. I also reread Mixed Up Files, but the Betsy Tacy books, which follow a girl from age 5 into her marriage in the early 20th century in Minnesota. I adore those books, and I was on social media a couple weeks ago, and the Betsy Tacy Society announced its annual conference, and it has some like really big names coming, really big names, like, you know, a writer for the New Yorker, and I just made this joke, like, and of course I'll be the keynote speaker, right? And I got a private email saying, we did not reach out to you because we didn't know if we could afford you. I'm so much cheaper than people think. Oh. And long story short is, I will be speaking at the Betsy Tacy conference in August of 2018.
Oh, that's so great.
And I'm really, but the Mixed Up Files, to me, is kind of a perfect novel. We have a girl named Claudia, and it's about what happens. I'm saying this right now, and I realize how much it affects the book that I'm writing right now, my next book, because I think one of the constant themes in the lives of everyone, but especially females, is this desire to matter. And Claudia Kincaid wants to matter. She senses that life is unfair, that something is missing, and that she needs an adventure, and she runs away with her brother, and they hide in the museum, Metropolitan Museum of Art. And then they discover that there's a statue, and there's a mystery about whether or not it was carved by Michelangelo. And Mrs. Bosley Frankweiler, who donated the statue to the museum, may in fact hold the answer. And Claudia becomes convinced that knowing the answer will change her and will make her life matter. And the wonderful thing is, she's right. When she finds out the answer, it is enough, just knowing whether or not Michelangelo carved the angel. It's a mystery. It's an odyssey. It's funny. It's real. It has a great twist when you realize who Mrs. Bosley Frankweiler has been telling the story to. Saxonbury, or is it Saxonbury or Saxonburg? I think it's Saxonburg. And I think it's one of the most perfect novels ever written. But I mean, children's books. I have to say, I think Ramona Quimby is the Emma Bovary of children's lit. I think that is. Great. I think she is one of the greatest characters. You know, we keep having this debate now about likable versus unlikable. Ramona's a tough little kid to like sometimes. She throws tantrums. She's prickly. She makes mistakes. She can be extremely stubborn. But I adore her, and I've had the great pleasure of starting to read those novels to my 7-year-old. And I mean, if we're going to talk about children's lit, we'll be here for another 9 hours. But I'll hold it there with Claudia Kincaid and Ramona Quimby.
I love that. That's so great. Yeah, that's so perfect. Well, I think we're done. Is there any questions from the outside world there? Because
We'll ask one more fun one. Donna Wilder asks, please describe your closet. What one thing would you take with you from that closet if you had to leave in a hurry and never return?
Okay, so my closet is kind of decadent because my closet is actually like a little alcove off of my bedroom, and it's not quite Real Housewives, but it is a room that has been admired by many women who have seen it. But if I had to take one object from my closet, I would probably do a pretty big sweep of my jewelry drawer and dump that into a bag, because there are things of great sentimental value. Mm-hmm. In particular, there is a heart necklace that was made out of like some kind of clay that my daughter made for me when she was in kindergarten. And there's some pieces of jewelry that belong to my mother. And so I'm from a Southern family originally, and my grandfather was known by the name Sweetheart. And he gave me a little golden heart that was studded in garnets, which is my birthstone. So yeah, I would just dump the jewelry drawer into a sack, knowing that that would get the most sentimental things out of the room.
Right.
So if that's fair, that's how I'm going.
That's a good one. Speaking of your birthstone, I understand that you share a birthday with some celebrities.
I do.
I just recently learned that you share a birthday with Carol Channing.
Carol, yes. Carol
Two
Channing.
very gifted people, and also Justin Timberlake. So I don't know.
We brought sexy back together.
So listen, I cannot thank you enough for doing this, for sitting in the Library Love Fest Tiki Hut.
I'd like to spend every day here in the Tiki Hut.
Come on.
Okay.
We'll make you an honorary member of the Library Love Fest team. I want to remind everybody to go and check out Laura Lippman's Facebook page, which is really wonderful, and keeping it populated and updated with the tour, which will be happening when the book goes on sale on February 20th. And librarians, if you're listening, and I know that you are, be sure to download the galley on Edelweiss. It's there now. And cast your vote for Library Read so that we can have 3 books on the Library Reads list. Nominations will be due December 20th for the book that comes out in February. And I can't stress it enough. I love this book. I thank you so much for writing it. I got a sunburn reading it, as you can tell. But it's the only sunburn I'm happy to have. So we'll end it on that. And thank you.
Thank you, Virginia.
Good luck to you, my friend.